I've been so excited to be able to make this video, you have no idea. Welcome everyone, today we're talking about DZ-BT01 and my first impressions, and usually we film these on live on my streams, but today I'm actually doing it offline. So you can also see there's a huge mess all around me, and I've still been very much hectically trying to figure everything out after Worlds has ended, and there's still quite a few people in Japan that I've been kind of showing around, so that's why this video usually would come out before the set releases, but today we're actually making it a few days after the set releases. But there's a good thing about this in that I actually can talk about having played the decks and what they feel like as well. This is, in my opinion, arguably the best set that Vanguard has probably put out in many years. I feel like I have said this about quite a few of the recent sets, but at the same time it feels like this time they not only up the quality of the overall like foils and high rarity product, but even a lot of the commons, except for maybe like the stuff with effects that was supposed to be in the starter decks, feel really high quality, and I hope they keep this standard up in the future in the upcoming sets too. So without any further ado, let's jump on into the card list and take a look at what every single nation has gotten in the first set of the Divines era, and I'm honestly so excited to talk about it because there's so much cool stuff in here. So again, this coming from a place where I've actually played with the majority of the cards from the set already. The only things I haven't tested out is the new Stoicheia ride line, as well as a lot of the quick starter decks, and I also haven't had a chance to mess with Chris Rain yet either, but I've heard some good things about her. But first things first, arguably my personally most excited about nation in the set was Dragon Empire, because of course of Varga Dragrass. Half because Varga Dragrass is cool and drawn by one of my favorite illustrators, Hagia Kaoru sensei, but also because, as you might be able to tell by what's on my table, I'm a pretty big Nao fan and I really quite like Nao, and you know, just wanting to play her deck has been a very strong burning desire of mine. So Varga Dragrass already made a breakdown of like the divine skills and everything, so we already talked about this card quite a lot on my channel, but if you haven't heard about it already, it's basically a grade 3 that lets you have 2 Vanguard attacks that are 23k minimum, with 2 drives and 0 drives on the 2 Vanguard swings, and once per game you can get a 3rd Vanguard attack out that also will still have 2 drives on it too. That does require your opponent to be on 4 more damage, and also for you have to use the first Vanguard skill to activate the condition for it too. So oftentimes on like turn 4 in your first Persona Ride turn, you will burn through that second skill in order to just kind of like whack your opponent down and really just aggress. The whole thing with Varga is that it's a super aggressive deck that basically just wants to push your opponent quickly and oftentimes win games on turn 4 going first. Like this deck is really quick. I think that it is quite weak to damage deny, and so some people are trying out Ethan, which is like the on-hit countercharger, but I feel like it being on-hit makes it a bit sus in my opinion. Usually the deck only needs 1 CB to function on its first turn, so you usually will have that 1 CB just from your opponent, you know, swinging Vanguard on turn 1 or turn 2 if they win first. But then it also comes paired with Shura, who's the other triple rare in the set for Dragon Empire, who's basically a 15k attacker that converts 2 energy into getting back one of your self-retiring rearguards. This is often combined with Midhat, but it can also be combined with the grade 2 of the ride line, which is the Boulder Axe Dragon, that basically is a 15k attacker that retires itself if you have a Varga Vanguard and to draw you 1. So you're getting a card from him no matter what, but then you can also use Shura's effect on attack to make it so that the Boulder Axe that retires goes back to your hand so you can use it again next turn. So you basically got 2 cards out of 1. And also when she gets retired by your Varga's effect, as long as your opponent's Vanguard on grade 3, so of course you need to wait for your opponent to ride up if you're going first, you can recall her after she's retired because Varga, sorry I didn't even mention, wipes out both players' front rows on attack. So you wipe out your own front row with your own effect, or you know, you have effects that proc from being retired, such as Shura that recalls herself and gives her plus 10k power as well, which is very nice. The other specific stuff for Varga we have is the Impalehorn Dragon, which is basically a 15k booster behind Varga, which is actually a very huge number, that also Soul Blast 1 and pops itself to draw you a card as well. This is also really huge because right now Shiranui is one of the best decks in the format, and a lot of players are running Bracing Angel Ladder in order to kind of circumvent Dominate, but Varga pops its own board all the time. All of your cards basically retire themselves at the end of the turn or end of the battle or whatever, and so therefore you usually pass an empty board for your Shiranui opponent to have nothing to dominate on the first stride turn. So that in itself is pretty huge. There's also the grade 3 that basically is a 13k booster if you have a Vanguard that is a Varga, but also in front row rearguard circle you also get plus 10k as long as your other front row units are different names from him. And he cannot be retired by effect. So it's only during your turn to can be retired by your opponent's effect, but you can basically put him up to the front row and make sure he doesn't die to your own Varga's effect. And that's more or less like the good Varga stuff to talk about. There's also the grade 1 of the ride line, of course, in this as well. You know, it's a new ride line, so we have the starter as well. The ride line soul charges 1 after calling itself out, which is really nice because you want to use the cyclers that, you know, Soul Blast 1 when ditched to draw a card and bot deck themselves, so you get the soul to use this as well very efficiently. And the plus 5k power and shield card is not really that much worth talking about. So the Varga stuff in general is really good. This is like a really good deck that's already basically complete from the set itself. And all of the kind of generic support in this set really works well with it too. So the only cards you really need to pick up for this deck to build it from the old stuff is like the Kalgafran, which is the old cycler, and Midhat, which is a common from set 7. And then of course, I guess like effect triggers, but they've been reprinted so many times, even in the quick starter decks. So I think you should by now have your quick, your effect triggers. Usually people play 8 crit and then either front or draw. And I personally quite like front because you can pair that with defensing roar and reuse that as well. And I feel like it's quite fine even as a one-of. A lot of people haven't prioritized draws, but I feel like this deck draws so much that I would honestly be a little bit worried about decking out sometimes. But I guess that's enough talking about the actual archetype. There's a lot of good generic stuff in this set too. So the generic cycler for Dragon Empire, in my opinion, is arguably one of the best. So all the cyclers, they have the same effect, where I actually wanted to do a separate video talking about the cyclers too, but we're going to talk about it now. So this first impression is going to be very long, I think. But basically, when it's ditched from hand for right deck cost or put to Guardian Circle, you can either CB1 or Energy Blast 3. So you get to choose, which is very nice because especially in the early game, this deck doesn't really use energy to draw a card. So every single ride ditch for this deck usually gets you a card back because you run 8 cyclers. But it's also just good in every Dragon Empire deck in general, because especially for the older decks that don't have anything to use energy on, you just want to put this in because the second skill also says when you call it and you have Persona written this turn, you either CB1 or Energy Blast 3 in order to choose a grade 1 from your drop that is not a Sentinel and call it. So in Varga, this lets you get back your mid-hats and keep drawing cards. You could play this in like stealth decks to get Shenlis back and stuff. You could put this into Overlord to get back like Gojo if you still play it, or of course like the Harb if you want it, but I guess you usually have it on board anyway. Basically, it's a cycler that does something new for Dragon Empire. A lot of them are always just like, oh, retire more cards, but this one for the first time is just a raw plus, and Dragon Empire has quite a lot of good grade 1s that it wants to bring back, so that's also very nice. We also have generic grade 1s, such as the Olfa that we talked about before in a video, but basically this gives support to 3 attack decks. So something like Triumph Dragon and Buff Sagara will quite enjoy this because you basically just needs to boost the rear guard, and when you're Persona riding, lets you CB1 to give a unit a 2 crit, but then it loses that 2 crit when it finishes its battle. So overall, the generics are pretty good. We have some support for some other archetypes in here as well, such as the support for the Triumph Dragon, basically giving a crit on rear. We have some Eugene support and giving us a 10k shield card, and also kind of like circumventing Eugene's resting effect. That's kind of compulsory. We do have a PG reprint, so that's of course going to be super important for everything in this. Other generics other than ride line stuff is like Energy Blast 4 to draw a card or like do something along those lines. So for Dragon Empire, they got Energy Blast 4 on attack to pop an opponent's rear guard and bind it. Sorry, it doesn't even pop, it just straight up binds. You have all the generics that were supposed to be in the starter decks that like, on ditch Soul Blast to draw 1, on ditch Call as a Rest, all the kind of stuff. But I think the more important side that I really want to highlight is the orders. So every nation got a normal order and a blitz order, and I think that both of them are really cool because they use energy as a resource. So these are really easy slot-ins into other decks from the past that don't have new cards yet. So the normal order is really cool. It's like this little like barbecue order that lets you essentially Energy Blast 2 to look at the top cards of your deck equal to the amount of open rearguard circles your opponent has, and you choose a unit card from among them that's the same or lower grade than your Vanguard and call it, and if you retire the card by an effect this turn, that thing gets plus 5k. This is a really easy inclusion into a lot of decks because this is again not a retire card in Dragon Empire, but instead a plussing card. This will also proc any of your on-place effects, which is really nice, and generally speaking in like retire heavy decks, this is really good in like, being able to look at least like top 3 or 4 sometimes. So because you have to use in the main phase, there has to be something that retires in the main phase. So like this wouldn't fit into Varga that retires in the battle phase, but maybe into like Gandiva or Buff Sagara that have main phase retire, this becomes a pretty okay inclusion. The only thing with Buff Sagara is that you play orders which is your arms, so it might not be like super great. Like Triumph Dragon could also like this quite a lot, although maybe the energy costs are a little bit sus there. So I really like this. It's like an interesting order that was like, makes the commons interesting to read, and I hope that they keep on doing these. And every nation also got a blitz order. This one being Energy Blast 2 to be a 25k shield as long as your opponent's on a grade 3 or greater Vanguard is really good, right? It's a 1 card 25k shield, which is basically the same amount of shield as the special heals that have to have, a specific condition be fulfilled. So 1 card 25k shield, I think is pretty good if you have the space for the blitz orders. And as we saw, Defensing Roar is a really good card that not only provides shield but also plussing. So if they make more blitz orders like that, I think a lot of people might be playing them too. So for Dragon Empire, my rating is honestly like 5 out of 5. I think they managed to bring out this amazing new deck out of it and also give some really amazing generic support and also still support older archetypes and of course the quick start deck boss too. I think overall throughout the set there is the slight complaint that they could have just put all these cards with effects from the starter deck into the starter deck itself and use the space for other cards, but I guess we'll see from set 3 onwards on how they treat the space instead. But I guess we'll see more of like new ride lines and stuff, how how we see for Dark States, which of course has the Direful Dolls instead. So 5 out of 5 for Dragon Empire. I think I really have nothing to complain about. I'm very happy with Dragon Empire in this set. Dark States, though, moving forward, is a deck or a nation that I initially was like, oh, is this new ride line really that good? Turns out it's insane. So I guess we'll go through the same pattern where we talk about the key archetype of the set that's introduced with this set, and then we'll talk about all the generics and other support for previous decks after that. So Direful Dolls is a deck that I didn't really rate too high on my first impression. I thought everything it did was pretty cool, but when you read the cards one at a time, you don't really see the cohesive, powerful engine that they all come into together. So for example, the main grade 3 lets you CB1 to call Workoroid Direful Dolls from your soul equal to your opponent's Vanguard's grade. So if your opponent's on grade 2, you can call 2 cards, but if they're on grade 3 or greater, you call 3 cards basically. And if you call 3 or more, he gets a drive. So he's a triple driver. He doesn't get any power in his own, but the triple drive is very, very huge. On top of that, the most important skill in my opinion is that every time he is attacked, you can choose a Direful Doll that is a Workoroid from your bind zone and call it to Guardian Circle and also give it 5k shield. This means that every single Workoroid Direful Doll that is even a grade 3 will have 5k shield. It also calls them to Guardian Circle, which means it procs any of their on guard effects. And also it's the fact that some of these other cards, like obviously like any card with 5k shield is now a 10k shield, and then there are effects that gain shield, so they're at least 15k shield. This also works with the Direful Doll heal and crit that exists, which are then 20k shields. And did I mention that you can use this every single battle, so you can even use it 7 times against Shirune attacking you 7 times? I think when I explain it in that sense, it might sound a bit more why, like you might understand a bit more why I'm rating this archetype as high as I am. But we're uploading some fight videos between me and Kai. I think I'm uploading mine on my YouTube channel member side, but he's uploading his on public side, where we are actually messing around with this deck a little bit, and it's really strong. But let me explain why it's so good too. So I guess we can talk about the multi-attackers. That's the double rare, the Providenza. So when she attacks a grade 3 or greater, as long as your Vanguard's a Direful Doll grade 3 or greater, she gets plus 10k. No cost. Not even a Soul Blast, this card just straight up gets 10k for no reason. But of course, that's not what makes her so good. At the end of her battle, if your Vanguard's a Direful Doll grade 3 or greater, you Energy Blast 3 and bind herself to choose a different named Direful Doll Workoroid from your soul and call it to rear. So that means that as long as you have set up your soul with some of the many other Workoroid Direful Dolls in the set, you get to do at least 4 attacks or 5 if you have 2 of these out. It does use Energy Blast 3, but keep in mind that you are getting 3 energy every turn. So maybe on the first grade 3 turn, you just do 3 swings and pass. That's why I think this deck might want to go second a bit more, because it really needs that energy to do 4 attacks or 5 attacks per turn, but also because you gain the drive if your opponent's on grade 3, so going second you kind of make more out of it. But this card is really insane, and the fact that she binds herself means that she's also a 10k shield that you can use for the grade 3's effect. But then you might be thinking, okay, how do I get her back into the soul to call her back out again with the Android every single turn? Well, we have a few cards that let you do that. The first one is the rare, which is the Liberata. When she's placed on rear or Guardian Circle, yes, this can be procced from the grade 3's effect. She chooses a Direful Doll from your drop and puts it into your soul. They can be any. It can be a trigger, it can be a normal unit, virtually anything. So you can then use this effect, bind it, guard with it, and then use her to basically put it back into the soul. On top of that, she gets plus 10k when she attacks, and at the end of the battle, she binds herself no matter what. So she's a 5k shield you can call out, and then proc that Guardian Circle effect, by the way. So you're getting 2 Direful Dolls out of 1 card from her rearguard circle and Guardian Circle on places. And she lets you optionally CB1 to draw one in case you want to sink in that CB there too. This deck doesn't really CB that much outside for the grade 3 itself, and of course if you want to use this effect. And you can even make space for 1 or 2 of the generic cat that countercharges as well, so that could also be an option there too. There's the grade 2 of the ride line that on place lets you put a Direful Doll into your soul from hand and then draw 1 and give herself in the Vanguard plus 5k, so the Vanguard doesn't gain power on its own, but with this it does. And what's important is that you can also chuck all your Direful Dolls into the soul with this and then call them out with the grade 3 as well. She also calls herself out when you ride over her, you know, so it's like you get to proc the effect no matter what. It's so good. The grade 1 of the ride line is when you ride over, you get top 7 for 2 Direful Dolls put into the soul. If you whiff this, the deck does struggle. I think it's really important to hit this, like hit the 2 Direful Dolls, and especially hit either like one of the, like the rare or the double rare or the last card we'll talk about. She also is a 13k attacker slash booster that binds herself, so she's going to be a 10k shield no matter what. And then in my opinion, the MVP that makes the whole engine kind of work is the Beragia. She is at the end of the battle that she boosts if you have a Direful Doll Vanguard. Sorry, it's kind of hard to say this all the time. She binds herself, so she doesn't need a grade 3 Vanguard. She can do this in the early game too. She binds herself and then she puts 2 Direful Dolls from your drop into your soul. So this is insane because it's basically recycling all of your pieces that you can then keep calling out with a grade 3 and then binding again and then using them to guard and then just redoing the same thing over and over again. What's more, she gains 5k shield from guarding with her, right? So she's a 10k shield no matter what, but if you guard with her from bind zone, she's a 15k shield. We also have the starter if you want to guard with that too, but honestly, like the double top package is so good. It's like so cohesive. You basically are setting up with the ride line, then you get to call out your stuff, do the multi-attacks, use this to recycle everything, and then once you need to put stuff into the soul again, you use Baragia, and everything has so much shield. So like sometimes I'll be on 4 damage and not take a single damage that whole turn from like 5 attacks because I can guard so much. It's like I don't even use my hand. Everything is just popping out of my bind zone, going back into the soul, and then I call it out from the soul. It's a bit slower because it doesn't have any early game, to be honest, because as you notice probably that all of these cards require grade 3 Direful Doll Vanguard. And I'm sure probably the playtesting team at Bushiroad like playtested this deck without the grade 3 requirement and then went like, no way, this is too good. And then they basically went like, okay, everything only works when you ride up to the grade 3. But yeah, the archetype from Dark States is actually insane. For generics, I think this is where the comparison gets a bit bleaker. The first skill is the same across all the grade 2 generics, but the second one is when you Persona Ride, you can CB1 or Energy Blast 3 to Soul Charge 1 if you want to, and then give her a boost in 5k. I think it's a bit unfortunate because she doesn't really plus a lot of the other of the cyclers do actually raw plus from the second skill. Soul Charging is technically a plus, but I think it's not as good as something like calling a card from drop or actively searching for something from your deck. You also have this card, which I think is quite nice. If you Persona, you CB1 and then Soul Charge 1 and call a card from Soul and give it 10k. So she's also huge herself, and on top of that, of course, she sets up your board, which is really strong. So definitely big points on the double rare cycler card. We have the usual generics that are like from supposed to be in the ride line, and of course the 2 orders. So the normal order I think is a bit weaker here as well, where it's like Energy Blast 2 to give a Vanguard the skill that if it hits the opponent's Vanguard, you can call a card from Soul. So that can be kind of interesting where you give this like hit pressure to your Vanguard in like the early game, and you can use it on turn 2, which is pretty interesting, where your opponent might want the CB to function. But then I don't know if I want to play multiple copies of this just to like play it. It doesn't give power to the thing it calls, so if your opponent then hits a defensive, it's like, well, I mean, it doesn't really do too much. So not too hot on this order. The Blitz order is okay too. It's like you Energy Blast 2 to choose a non-sentinel non-OT unit card from your soul and call it to Guardian Circle and give it plus 10k shield. So you are most of the time just getting this as a 25k shield as well, because you're going to be calling a trigger probably. So the generics are okay, I think, for Dark States, and that might be where it docks points. Greedon support's pretty good. I mean, this guy basically is a big attacker slash sets up your board with Desire Devils. This thing is a 10k shield slash being able to go back to hand to be a 10k shield when he's put to soul from rear is also very good. So a big defensive support for Greedon, and also the common's really nice and just like chucking a Greedon or Desire Devil into your soul from your drop, so you can set up the Greedon condition very quickly. So the Greedon support is pretty good in terms of archetypes, and then of course the support for the Oserages, the quick start deck, is really good too. I mean, you basically draw a lot of cards from the support in this set for that quick start deck, so this thing draws you cards while getting a lot of power, and then of course this grade 2, which is supposed to be in the quick start deck, also draws you cards while setting up your field in order to call with Oserages. So those supports are also pretty good. So I think in terms of like archetype supports, we do pretty good on this set. The new archetype is insane in this set, but the generics I think for Dark States leave a little bit lacking. So gonna be a bit harsh because I think the generics are where a lot of these sets ride on in terms of their long-term value. You know, like you're still potentially sometimes buying set 10 because you still want the like Persona cyclers. And so I think if the cyclers are not very good, I think they should be taken quite seriously. I think for the first effect, you still want the cycler, but it's just not as good as the other ones in my opinion. So I'm gonna give a 4 out of 5 for Dark States. Sorry, I warned you this is gonna be long, and it's gonna be long. They also added a whole new nation to the main set, so that's another extra thing to talk about. But let's move on to Brandt Gate. Brandt Gate also got a really good deck too, which isn't a new deck. It's an old deck getting support, but it got so much new stuff, it's basically a new deck. So Wellstra in this set is basically a renewed deck in a way, where they kind of like took a lot of the stuff from the old one and chucked it out, which a lot of people aren't too happy about. The only thing that's really sticking around from the old times is like Bobo Mine and Freiheit. And also, sorry, I have her somewhere here right with me, which is the, what's her name actually? Beruhina? The secretary lady, the one that gives you an L. She's also still there, which is pretty nice. She didn't really get a chance to be used because Wellstra wasn't really seen as a real deck during set 13. But now it is! Happy for you, Wellstra. Congrats on your promotion. But anyway, so Wellstra itself is, his divine skill is like the one you just kind of want to fire in turn 3. So you CB1 and you put 2 products into the order zone, and then you get to activate one of them. And on attack, you also Energy Blast 2 to operate a product and get 10k. Very simple stuff and works well with the old support, but of course we do have a new product that basically says that when it's put to the order zone, you get to draw 1 and energy charge 3, and use quite a bit of energy in this deck, so it's pretty good. And whenever this is operated by your Wellstra, the turn after it was set, you can retire an opponent's rear guard, ping your opponent for 1 damage if they're at 4 damage or lower, and also minus 10k their Vanguard. It's pretty good. The only downside is that you have to wait for turn 4 far for this, and going second, it can be a bit too slow. Other than that, you have the Cortana / Ayanami fusion from Evangelion as well as Halo, who's a 15k attacker if you have a product in your order zone, and basically on attack lets you CB1 if you have a Welcher with a Divine Skill Vanguard to operate a product. CB1 to operate is pretty good because you can use this on your Freischütz Maximum in order to minus 5k on your opponent's Vanguard and retire an opponent's rear. So that means that this 15k is hitting to an 8k or lower, maybe like a 3k, and therefore it's asking for a lot of shield. Pretty good. She's overall a pretty decent card. They also got this Secretary lady who basically is a 13k booster that energy charges as well. You don't need the energy that much though, because your energy charge from this order are already 2, so I think you don't really need to play this card as much from our testing. And then of course the rod line, basically one of them searches you for one of your products, either grade 2 or grade 1, depending if you go first or second. And the other one, the grade 2, lets you basically soul boss 1, ditch 1 to search for 2 products. So you do get a plus out of it, and you deck thin as well. And that kind of immediately sets up for your grade 3 turn 2. You also on attack Energy Blast 3 to operate a product, which you can use if you have, of course, the grade 2, the Lubeltal, which is a very good card. But overall, Welcher support in this set is very good. It's a very good deck overall. And I think especially the JP side is gassing up the deck quite a bit as well. So I'm curious to see what gets cooked, but I think overall from our testing, it does feel a deck that really wants to go first. Going second, especially against something like Varga, which is really fast and aggressive, doesn't really give this deck the time it needs to set up and reach that turn 4 to do the damage ping. So I'm curious to see like how much more the deck will change, because right now we're basically playing like 7 counter chargers in this deck too, because it counterblasts out the wazoo. In terms of generics, I quite like the gun generic. I think we'll just call them the gun cyclers for the time being. The gun cycler, of course, shares the first effect to draw a card, but the second one is when you Persona Ride, you can CB1 or Energy Blast 3 in order to search your deck for either a different grade 3 than your Vanguard from your deck, or search for a set order from your deck and add it to your hand. But then you have to discard one, which is a bit unfortunate. So kind of pluses, but then also, you know, forces you to discard. So it's like you can get some bricks out of your hand, I guess. But I wouldn't say it's super fantastic. I think it's a bit better than the Dark States one, but it's not necessarily as good as the Dragon Empire one from the ones we've talked about so far. This generic is also not that great. I think you basically are just giving like this weird blitz order restriction and battle door at the same time. So it's kind of fine. It's just like what, you know, Vanguard kind of does already. So I'm not too sold on the cyclers this time around, or like the generics in this set. The order is also like Energy Blast 2 to look at top 2, add 1 to hand, 1 to soul, but it's kind of tough to play normal orders in order-based decks. The blitz order is kind of cool though. You basically give an attacked unit plus 10k and then ditch any number of set orders from hand up to 2. And for each one you ditch, you draw 1 and get another plus 10k. So this can go up to, you know, like, sorry, not plus 10k, plus 5k, so it's going up to 20k shield. And so it's kind of nice in that you get to cycle through cards. This could be pretty good in something like Revidia. But again, the generics aren't necessarily as great as you would expect them to be. We have some support for older decks, but I mean, the whole point of the main grade 3 is that it's an older deck, but we have some support for Gravidia, which is actually pretty good. Lets you look at the top cards of your deck. Sorry, this is the common one, is the one that lets you look at the top card of your deck. This one is an extra shield / also letting you set a bunch of rocks and then draw a card. So the Gravidia support's not too bad. It might actually be kind of real. And then of course the Ashtorm stuff is pretty nice. I think his rear guard is overall pretty cool because he's an extra restand. So you can build Ashtorm as like a really aggressive deck if you want to try to go for that. But overall, I think that again, we have a very solid ride line in Welstra that is, I think, as solid as Direful Dolls. But then I think we are kind of lacking on the front of generics again. And so I do think that this is another 4 out of 5. And so far Dragon Empire is the most of the most impressive of the nation so far. But I'm also being a little bit harsh. Like honestly, the quality of the set is so high that I have to be a little bit harsh, and I cannot just be giving 5 out of 5 to every single nation. So it's just the generics that leave a little bit more to be desired for Brandt Gate. Moving on to Keter though, of course, our new protagonist is also very, very good. I'm a lot more impressed with Keter after playing with the stuff than I was in theory. The new ride line Rezael, of course, is not just a new ride line, but it's also our divine skill. I made a whole video about this, and I've kind of echoed the point that of course it can be used generically in a lot of other decks as kind of like a finisher / backup option too. But he's overall really good as a card itself, as a deck, right? You get basically 4 to 5 attacks per turn from his skill, and basically it's Keter Pile. This whole deck is Keter Pile, where you're basically just putting in a lot of the good generics that Keter has. Selgaon, like the Order Cycler from set 11. You have like counter chargers, all kinds of stuff that like retires itself or like goes to soul after battle, like Kadwala as well. And then you get that like crazy divine skill that basically pumps crits back to your deck, gets you a confirmed 6 damage heal, and on top of that also gets you the extra drive 5, where those crits that you put back have so much pressure. The support is pretty good too. I mean, you have a CB1 that calls something and also, you know, or adds to hand, and also something that is a 20k attacker at minimum. So that's pretty good. You have a dedicated countercharger that discards a card from hand, but it's actually not as bad because you plus a lot in this deck. And the ride line basically just calls out stuff for you, which is also pretty good. So I think overall, Rezael, I think might seem the least impressive just from what's in this set. And I think that might be a point where you can criticize the deck a little bit, because even though it's the protagonist deck, it feels like when I look at my deck build, it's just full of generics like Sages, Order, Cycler, Cell, Gaon, Cadwalla. It's just Keter, right? I really like those kind of decks, but for a new player that's just like, oh, I just got into Vanguard, I can't wait to build Rezael, it's like, wait, this deck costs how much? It's not exactly the most friendly, I think, but I guess that also means, I mean, it's gonna get more cards in the future and probably get some more dedicated support that's really good in the coming sets too, because it's only the first set of this new era of the anime. And we know there's multiple seasons coming, so there's definitely gonna be more Rezael support as we go through the months. In terms of generics, I think that Keter is winning pretty hard on this one. Biscotti is, in my opinion, maybe the best one. Of course, first skill is shared among all of them, but the second one is if you persona ride when you call her, CB1 or Energy Blast 3, look at top 3 of your deck and then choose one, put it on top of your deck and put the rest on the bottom of your deck. But if you called her other than in battle phase, you can call that card to rear instead of putting it on the top of the deck. So if you call her in battle phase, for example, off of Rezael, you get to use that effect to kind of determine your drive check a little bit. But if you call her in main phase, she's just Energy Blast 3 to call a card. It's like the freest plus possible. So I think that Biscotti is honestly I would say as good as the Dragon Empire one. I think she is the most expensive one, I think, but I personally am quite surprised that the Dragon Empire one is not that expensive. Maybe this one is even more generic because the Dragon Empire one has to call grade 1s. This one literally calls anything. So it's like by far the best, I think. The Cycler is also fine. It's like CB1, look at top 3 and then choose a card, call it, but the rest of the bot deck is fine. Also gets plus 10k. So pretty good on the Cycler department too. All the other generics are basically the ones that are shared across all the different decks. You have Energy Blast 4 to draw a card if you have 4 or more units, which is pretty nice. And then the orders, I think the orders are also a big win for Keter here, where we have the Sleeping Dogs. This one is Energy Blast 2 to choose 2 units and give them the skill that when this unit is boosted, it gets plus 10k. And if you have 5 or more units, when you play this, you draw a card too. So there's already been talks about using this in Rezael, but it's also really nice in Luard, where you can basically give 2 of your attackers a 10k buff and draw a card, because Luard builds a board like super easily and doesn't really play orders either. So having this as like a 2-of in Luard could be pretty huge too if you can make space for it. And we saw Chad, who came second at the Japanese Worlds, actually play an order-based build of Luard that this fits into really nicely as well. So this might even be the new age of Luard, and just in general, it's very, very good generically. So I feel like you want infinite copies of this card if you're a Keter main. Blitz Order is also good. It's like Energy Blast 2, like a top card of your deck, and you may either call it to Guardian Circle or leave it on top. And if you called it, you give it plus 10k shield. So it's like if you see a trigger, you can leave it on top, but so it's kind of a shame because you Energy Blasted 2 and ditch the card to like not do anything with it, but you know you have a confirmed trigger. But you can also call it and get, you know, 10k shield on top of that. So it's also, I think, pretty good. So the generics are super high scorers here. So while I'd say the archetype itself might not be as highly rated, I think the Keter generics are really driving up my rating of Keter. Support for Zaref Cell is really good. Their double rare is really nice, and you know, all the stuff from the starter deck is also quite good. Alden support is pretty cool too. Basically, when this boosts the Vanguard end of that battle, if your opponent's on grade 3 or greater, CB1 put it to soul and basically restand your rears. It's pretty nice. You get to do 5 attacks with Alden, which is also something that the deck kind of wanted. And that's kind of it for like the other kind of like other support for decks in this set. So I think overall Keter gets a 5 out of 5 for me too. I do think the Rezael ride line leaves something to be desired, but Rezael's kind of like generic usage potential is pretty highly rated for me. And all the other generics in this set are pretty insane for Keter, so I think that drives up the rating very highly. All right, I'm trying to wrap this up in under an hour. Let's move on to Stoicheia. So now it's going to be the 2 nations I haven't playtested myself yet. So Rascalia is the order-based ride line for Stoicheia that basically lets you give 5k to all of your Vereno units and also give herself a crit if you have 5 or more Vereno units on board. And then every time she's attacked and it doesn't hit, if you played a Blitz Order in that battle, you draw 1 and you may countercharge 1 if you haven't countercharged yet during that turn. So she's very defensive and she works directly in conjunction with her Blitz Order that basically is a 20k shield that lets you play another Blitz Order after you play it. So if you play multiple of these, you can kind of keep chaining them and then finish on whatever Blitz Order you want, but it's a very generic, like this itself is actually a generic card. It doesn't have to be played with Rascalia, but of course it works best with Rascalia because of what her effect says. Unfortunately, she doesn't actually have a triple rare support card of her own. The same as Direful Dolls. That's reserved for the anime decks basically. But she does have a card that CB wants to restand and get plus 5k, so you do get the ability to do, you know, 4 or 5 attacks. She also has a Vereno/Blitz Order Searcher from the top 5. That's also a 10k booster. That is also a Vereno, so that's also good. Helps us achieve that condition. And we have a Blitz Order/Vereno Recycler from drop here as well, for ditching 1, which is also another very good support card. So overall, I think Vereno as a deck is pretty good from theory, but again, I haven't actually had a chance to play with this yet, so I think that overall it seems okay, but I've heard from people playtesting it that it leaves a little bit more to be desired. So I would feel bad rating it the same as Direful Dolls, but I would also feel bad if just because I haven't playtested it, my rating is off. So I'll be a bit like hopeful positive here. I also just love defensive game design, so I think that for me personally, it's a very high rating. Magnolia got a lot of support, but then Magnolia topped immediately after the set came out, and it was the Magnolia Masks deck that didn't use any of the new cards. So I'm not sure how to feel about that. Like, they got this triple rare that clogged up my case quite a bit, that basically allows you to revive something from your drop, which is pretty cool, and then also, you know, kind of get some power. You have this thing that essentially lets you search for a Sorter from your deck or a Magnolia, so that helps you to find your Elder, I guess. And then of course the Magnolia ride line itself got renovated, and it's actually pretty good too. So I think the Magnolia ride line itself being better now and not whiffing and stuff is also quite good. So support for all decks is a plus, but then the generic I think is really good for Stoicheia for this specific one, because the like unique skill is when you Persona Ride and call it CB1 or Energy Blast 3 to choose a card that is a grade 2 or lower, normal unit or an order card from your drop that is different name from him and also not a sentinel, and add it back to your hand. This is really good in a lot of Stoicheia decks, I think. Like, this is good in Rorowa, this is good in Leonorn, I think it's going to be played in quite a lot of things. Being able to just recycle your cards is really good, especially in decks that don't have good reviving options like Magnolia. So I'm quite happy to see this in Leonorn, I'm quite happy to see this in Rorowa, like I said, and there's a chance it'll be played in other things too, so I rate this cycler very highly myself. This cycler not so much though. It is CB1 to call something from top 3, but it discards the rest, and I've had the one time I used this card, I ditched a bunch of triggers and it wasn't a very happy time. I think I'd be happier if it was like mill 3 and then call a card from drop and then she gets plus 10k would be a bit better. But the Keter one wins a bit higher on this double rare cycler department for me. And all the other generics are kind of like stuff from the starter deck. The only other support, of course, speaking of the starter deck, is of course the multi-tacker for Cristianos, but it does feel like it's a little bit too slow. It's good that Cristianos does have a multi-tacker, but does have to wait for turn 4 in order to actually be active, and usually is locked at 4 attacks. So Stoicheia for me, I think is overall like a solid 4 out of 5. Not too sure about the new ride line yet myself too much. The cycler is really good, so I give it points there, and the Magnolia support is kind of like hit or miss here and there. Overall, it feels like it's okay. So if I wanted to be harsh, I give it a 3 out of 5, and I think maybe I should be more honest and do that. But I think that there's a lot of unexplored space, especially with Magnolia Elder, as well as the new Rascalia ride line. So I'll be nice, I'm feeling good today, 4 out of 5. Finally, Lyrical. Lyrical is, as usual, very, very hyped up and is now part of the main sets. The new deck is Chris Rain, and people thought I was kind of like bullying Chris Rain just because I didn't give any comments about the deck in my evaluation of my early days of testing that I do on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter if you're not already, by the way. I also made a Blue Sky account because everyone's doing that, so feel free to follow that too if you want. But I just haven't had time to test out Chris Rain yet. I kind of have a build in mind, but just need time to really like sleeve up stuff. And the fact that I'm recording this, it's almost 3 p.m. and I haven't had lunch yet, it's probably telling you how my time management has been going lately. So I will sit down with this deck at some point soon, but I haven't really had the chance yet. But Chris Rain is basically a 28k 2 crit that draws you cards and energy charges. So I've heard that she has an insane hand, and once per game, her divine skill lets her basically do multi-attacks. Otherwise, she's a 3-attack deck that has a very annoying guard restrict to boot as well. So this thing is a 13k booster that you can also energy blast 3 for in order to make your opponent guard with 3 different grades at the same time if they want to guard when they don't use a sentinel. This guard restrict is crazy. Like, I think I've said it multiple times, but I'll keep saying it. Realm is likely to become a new form of guard restrict like Battledore was, and I wouldn't be surprised if we get more of these, because this is just, it's such a strong thing. Like 3 different grades is actually pretty hard to achieve for a lot of decks, and playing against Chris Rain means you actively have to always be thinking about what's in your hand because you have to guard very specifically. Chris Rain also got a triple rare support card that basically helps to make more cards on the board, and is also 20k attacker, and a lot of people thought it's like, oh, we're gonna run this deck as a Highlander deck, but all the lists that I'm seeing that people are generally playing Chris Rain with is using all the good cards at 4. 4 Yuika, 4 Valshablan, 4 Anies, 4 Preseya, basically 4 of the guard restrict. It's like, I mean, you just have enough different cards. You have to have 5 or more different units, so it needs to be 4 different rear guards. 1, 2, 3, plus Yuika. There you go, there's 4. So, and you're drawing so much that finding 4 different ones isn't really that hard, but I do think this deck might struggle into like big retire matchups. But overall, being able to do 5 attacks with the divine skill thanks to Anies is pretty good too. So I think overall Chris Rain is probably going to be a pretty good deck. I think we just haven't really explored it, and I haven't really had time to playtest it yet myself either, but I have pretty high hopes for it. She has another 28k attacker. Every deck kind of got a 28k attacker. I didn't really talk about them in this one too. Chris Rain's ride line also calls cards on the top of your deck, which means that when you use the divine skill, you just like add everything to your hand, even if you call triggers, which is pretty good. So overall, I think the support for the deck is quite good, and we kind of do need to talk about the generics in order to kind of like put Chris Rain into full perspective. But I think for a new ride line, it is quite strong, and I think the once per game, like multiple attacks, is not really a bad design choice either. That we kind of were pretty harsh on it when it was first revealed, but I think I'm warming up to Chris Rain more and more as time goes on. But let's talk about the generics, and Preseya is like the most expensive cycler, I think, or like the second most expensive, and I don't get why. The first skill is really, of course, is good. It's good in everything, but the second one is like when you call it, when you Persona Ride, CB1 Energy Blast 3, choose a unit, give it 5k, and if you chose a rear guard, at the end of the turn it goes back to your hand. So the whole point of this is that you can reuse your strong on place effects, right? So like something like the Anies, Valshablan, I guess if you want to reuse her on Persona, give 5k to the front row effect. I guess Yuika don't really need to bounce in this deck too much either, so it's mostly Anies, I guess you're kind of in Valshablan, you're taking back to hand. And I guess if you called any triggers, you can also bounce them back to hand too, so you can kind of like do a more aggressive commit and it gives the plus 5k power, but it doesn't really plus, so that's why I was like, is this really that good? It just bounces one of your existing rears back to hand, but the Keter ones and the Dragon Empire ones actively give you a plus. But it's lyrical cyclers are always pretty expensive, so I guess that's good value. I think their other generic is okay. It's like a mini Valshablan, I guess, which if you don't have Valshablan is definitely a very welcome inclusion. And all the other generics outside of the order are okay. This one's like Energy Blast 2 to give 3 regards plus 5k, which is also alright, mini Valshablan, I guess. The Blitz order is quite cool though, where you Energy Blast 2 and then you get to, if you've lost a rear guard by an effect this turn from your opponent, you can give your attack unit plus 25k power. So it's pretty good, but it's like very specifically against retire matchups or you intercepting being a reliance for this one. So it's kind of hard if your Vanguard just goes swing Vanguard and then just like you haven't done anything with your rears yet. So I think this Blitz order is maybe not as good as some of the other ones. The ride lines for like the stuff for the quick start decks is pretty good, and we have some support for some of the older decks too. So of course Marilyn got herself a big powerful attacker slash draw card, which is not bad, but we also have Kairi support in this deck, which is, or Kairi support in this set rather, not deck. This one of course lets you get boost as well as plus 5k power, and at the end of the turn CB1 put it to soul and choose your Kairi Vanguard, and for every 2 grades you get to bounce a rear guard back to hand. So if you're in Kairi grade 4, you actually get a lot of cards back to your hand, which I think makes Kairi very good in this set, and I think that's something we've been sleeping on especially. I think Kairi really has to be re-estimated because like she got support in the last set, the Lyrical Cycler is really good, the grade 3 one, then on top of that she also has our promo. So with this I think that Kairi should be a really good deck that I feel like I'm surprised people haven't really looked at more. But so overall I think Lyrical has a really good new ride line, really good support for old decks, and also a pretty good generic card pool. Maybe leaves a bit to be desired, but it's like they're good alternatives to the more expensive cards. You know, like building Lyrical right now is pretty hard with how expensive Valshablan and Yuika are. So I think I'll be nice to Lyrical as well. And do we give it a 5 out of 5? I feel like it's kind of pretty similar. Our other 5 out of 5s were Dragon Empire and Keter. I think it comes pretty close to it. I don't have as much to complain about in this one. I think if anything, Stoicheia might need to be docked down to 3 to 5, but we were being nice today. Lyrical gets a 5 out of 5 too. And that is it, dear viewers. Thank you for watching this very long first analysis or first impressions of the set. I honestly really enjoy doing these because I like to know all the cards. It would have taken even more time if I had more time and gone through everything in even more detail, but I think the fact that we took almost an hour going over this set means that there's a lot to talk about. It's a very good set, and I think that if you're going to take Toya's advice on cartons being practical, I think this is the set to do that. Both me and Kai invested in a carton for this set each, and we basically made a lot of our money back from just spares, usually more than half of the case's price, and then on top of that we still have a playset of everything, which far exceeds what the case basically costs. So this might be the time to invest. It's a very good set, and I think a lot of these cards, especially the cyclers, are going to go up in the future because Energy Blast 3 to draw a card on ditching for ride or from guarding is really good. But with that, that's gonna be it for me today. If you liked the video, give it a like. If you haven't already, please do subscribe. We are getting closer and closer to 60k and I need your support. And of course, if you want to support the channel and get some bonus content, consider becoming a YouTube channel member. I do upload member exclusive videos, and we have recorded some for the set already, which I'll be editing and uploading very soon. So look forward to some exclusive Varga camera action, first-person POV, and you also get access to some videos early, as well as you help to fund some of the cool projects I do, like the Vanguard Worlds Invitational. So thank you so much for all of your support. But anyway, with that, that's gonna be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.